If there is one civilization that can be considered the most influential in the history of humanity, it is without a doubt the Romans. Their influence can be seen in our language, law, architecture, art, engineering, and even in our very way of governing. The Roman Empire, at its greatest extent, stretched over 3 continents and included almost 60 million people. Rome's greatest emperors are remembered to this day as some of the most influential leaders in human history, and yet their empire fell. Today we are going to find out why. Rome was not built in a day, and neither was their empire. Before Rome became an empire, it was just another small Italian city-state. However, due to a combination of favorable geography, political innovation, and sheer military prowess, Rome grew exponentially throughout the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, conquering the entire Italian peninsula. This period of Rome's history is known as the Roman Kingdom, which ended in 509 BC when Rome was supposedly taken over by an oligarchy. Throughout the next 2 centuries, Rome would continue expanding, taking over the entirety of central Italy, and defeating their long-standing rival, Carthage, in a series of 3 wars, known as the Punic Wars. By the end of the 3rd century BC, Rome had become a Mediterranean power. However, Rome's greatest period of expansion was during the 2nd century BC, with the reigns of the most famous of Rome's emperors. Rome reached its greatest territorial extent under the rule of Emperor Trajan, who reigned from 98 to 117 AD. However, it was under Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, that Rome really began to flourish. It was during his reign that the Roman Republic finally became the Roman Empire. Augustus ushered in a period known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman Peace. The Pax Romana was a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity across the entire Mediterranean world. The Pax Romana lasted for about 200 years and encompassed the reigns of most of Rome's best emperors, including Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, Nerva, Trajan, and Hadrian. These rulers kept expanding Rome's borders while maintaining peace and prosperity throughout the empire. But not all of them were benevolent. Some, like Caligula and Nero, were known for their debauchery and tyranny. But despite these bumps in the road, the Pax Romana continued and Rome entered into its golden age. By the end of the 1st century AD, the entire Mediterranean basin was under Roman control. Rome had taken over Egypt, Greece, Judea, and even parts of Mesopotamia. Rome controlled the richest areas of the ancient world, including the silver mines of Spain and the gold mines of Egypt. Under Augustus, Rome's population grew to 500,000. People from all over the empire came to Rome to participate in its trade, culture, and politics. During the Pax Romana, Rome was the richest city in the world, and life was relatively peaceful and prosperous for most of its citizens. Despite Rome's wealth and power, cracks were beginning to show in the empire's foundation. One of the main reasons that Rome was able to expand so rapidly was due to the introduction of slavery into their society. From the time Rome conquered the Mediterranean, they took over many slave-based economies and used slaves to power their war machine, while Rome at its peak owned somewhere around 3 million slaves. Most of those slaves were located in their newly acquired provinces. As the empire grew, the number of slaves in Rome itself actually decreased. Without slaves to fuel their economy, Rome would have never been able to grow to the size that it did. However, after growing so large, the empire was now facing a massive shortage of new slaves. Rome's solution was to conquer more land and enslave more people. However, after conquering the entire Mediterranean, there weren't any massive slave populations left to be found. As a result, Rome began to look inwards. Instead of conquering outside of their borders, Rome began to subjugate the people living within their own borders. Rome made conquests into Germania and Dacia, but these campaigns proved to be costly, both in terms of manpower and money. Rome was also fighting a continuous guerrilla war along their northern border with the Dacians. Rome never fully subdued Dacia, and as a result, Emperor Trajan's empire would prove to be the largest that Rome would ever reach. Another reason for Rome's inability to continue its expansion was simply because of how large its empire already was. As Rome grew larger and larger, it became harder and harder to manage. Rome's infrastructure was built to handle a much smaller population than what it was actually handling. Roads were constantly breaking down and being rebuilt. Aqueducts would fail and leave cities without clean drinking water. Grain shipments to Rome would often be destroyed by pirates. Rome's legions were often too far away from home to adequately protect the provinces. And as a result, unrest and rebellion was becoming commonplace across the empire. By the mid-2nd century, the Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse. However, the collapse of Rome did not happen overnight. It took decades for Rome to fall into decline. Starting in the year 180, the Antonine Plague swept through the Roman Empire, killing off roughly 5 million people. The Antonine Plague devastated the population of Rome and severely weakened the empire's tax base. Though this plague was not Rome's fault, it was the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire. Soon after the plague hit, Rome would experience a wave of civil wars. For the next 80 years, the Roman Empire was engulfed in a series of civil wars. This period of civil wars would take the lives of some of Rome's most famous emperors, including Pertinax, Commodus, Septimius, Severus, and Caracalla. By the end of the 3rd century, Rome was still standing. But its population had dropped from 500,000 to less than 100,000. While the 3rd century saw a lot of upheaval within Rome, it was also a century of great change for the rest of the world. Starting in 220 BC, China would enter into a period known as the Three Kingdoms. In India, the Gupta Empire would usher in a golden age for the Indian subcontinent, and in Mesoamerica, the Maya civilization would emerge and thrive for several centuries. However, none of these civilizations would come close to matching the influence that Rome would leave on the world. And all of these civilizations would outlast Rome. After struggling through a couple of centuries, Rome would get its act together under the reign of Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian divided the empire into two halves in an effort to make it easier to govern. He also introduced price controls and reformed the Roman army. Diocletian's reforms saved Rome from imminent collapse, but they also doomed it to mediocrity. Diocletian's decision to split the empire in two was actually the beginning of the end for Rome. After splitting the empire, the eastern and western halves would begin to grow apart. Each half would develop its own distinct culture, and each half would eventually declare itself its own empire. Diocletian also introduced price controls to stop inflation, but he inadvertently caused deflation. Deflation hurt Rome's economy because it caused the value of currency to increase. As a result, people hoarded currency instead of spending it, which led to an economic depression. In spite of Diocletian's best efforts, Rome had become too big to handle. Just 40 years later, Rome would collapse. In the West, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, would abdicate the throne in the year 476, marking the traditional end of the Roman Empire. However, the Eastern Roman Empire would survive for another 1,000 years until the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople in 1453. While Rome's territory is long gone, its legacy is not. Rome's contributions to the world are immeasurable. From their innovations in law to their innovations in architecture, Rome changed the course of human history. Roman law formed the basis of modern European law. Roman roads allowed for quick and easy travel across their empire. The Roman aqueducts brought clean water to millions of people. Roman arches and domes changed the way that buildings were constructed. Roman concrete is still used in modern construction projects today. Roman numerals are still used to mark important occasions. And the Latin language lives on, and the Romance language is spoken by hundreds of millions of people. It's hard to imagine a world without Rome. However, despite Rome's greatest contributions, it's important to remember their worst atrocities. Rome's military expansion came at the cost of millions of lives. Rome's legions murdered, enslaved, and pillaged across the Mediterranean. And Rome's leaders were often no better than the common thug. Rome's history is full of great leaders, but it's also full of tyrants and despots. Rome is the greatest empire in history, but it's also a cautionary tale, a warning that no empire will last forever. Rome's story should remind us that even the greatest empires will eventually fall. But Rome's story should also inspire us. A small Italian city-state managed to grow to the size of the United States. Rome went from a small republic to a massive empire, and they accomplished this by overcoming obstacle after obstacle. Rome is proof that if we work hard enough and smart enough, we can accomplish anything. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe Historomystic and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. See you next time.